All right. Good afternoon to everyone in the East and good morning to everyone in the West. And thank you for joining us today on this April 30th. Congratulations for making it all the way to April 30th. And welcome to Data Mapping, Building the Bedrock, the final installment of the RICO New World of Work live webinar series, where we will be discussing how you can shed light on your dark data and mitigate critical business risks by understanding its composition. We want to just start off with a few housekeeping items. So before we begin, please note that the webinar is in listen-only mode. The webinar will be recorded and made available to all participants after the session. Please submit your questions at any time. We will be doing a Q&A at the end of the presentation, and any questions that we are unable to get to during the webinar, we will be responding to post-webinar. And sorry, I just repeated myself. We will be following up by email to any questions we may not be able to cover today. So let's move on to the introductions. I'm Tamara Porter. I'm the Director of Business Development, eDiscovery, and Information Governance at RICO eDiscovery. I have over 20 years of global technical business development experience, and over the past 5 years have been dedicated towards working with our enterprise clients on eDiscovery and information governance initiatives. I'll be the moderator for today, and we'll handle the question and answer period at the end of the webinar. Joining me today is Mark Evans, Senior Sales Engineer for our partner Active Navigation. Mark is based in the Washington, D.C. area, and in his role, he supports a broad set of prospects and clients during proof of concept and pilot implementations of the Active Navigation suite of software. Mark is an excellent speaker and an incredibly interesting guy, and it's our pleasure to have him join us today. He has more than 20 years of consulting and technology experience in information management, including records management, archives, and digital presentation. So just to introduce the topic of data mapping today, we want to take a step back and talk a little bit about unstructured data. Sometimes known as dark data, it is increasing at a rate of 62% per year, according to the International Data Group, the IDG. In fact, by 2022, the IDG predicts that 93% of all data will be unstructured. And dark data is very difficult to manage, as it's typically stored across a distributed IT environment with no single owner. That leads to repositories that are full of rot. And when we talk about rot, that means redundant, obsolete, trivial, or transitory content, increasing your organization's risk footprint and overall IT costs for storage, infrastructure, and management. Meanwhile, the effectiveness of your organization decreases as employees waste time trying to find data content critical to their roles and responsibilities. Because rot is typically unmanaged, it's vulnerable to data breaches, and all these issues can be lessened by implementing a program for content cleanup and data minimization. To start, though, we'd like to take a step back and discuss data mapping and how it can be used to launch these types of business-critical initiatives. By definition, data mapping is the process of matching fields from one database to another. It's the first step towards facilitating data migrations, data integrations, and any other data management tasks. So the overarching goals for today's session are to learn more about how we can, first, establish insight and analysis of your unstructured data. Next, potentially identify any sensitive or PII, that's personal identification information, data to reduce your organizational risk. And finally, discover how to enable an unstructured data inventory, ensuring efficient data migrations and contributing positively to policy-based actions. So I'm going to hand it off to Mark now, and he can begin to show us the way. Take it away, Mark.
Yeah, thanks very much, Tamara. So first of all, it's a pleasure to be involved today. I think we've got a good story to tell, and I hope you find some really good takeaways from this. So as Tamara said, the data map is really a foundational layer, and it facilitates the ability to solve many problems. And you can see on the chart here a wide range of problems that a data map really facilitates. Primarily, it's understanding about what content you have, what's out there, what's the nature of that content, and how is it distributed across your organization. And as Tamara said, it facilitates many things like the ability to clean up this redundant, obsolete, and trivial information that's cluttering up your enterprise. It'll help you to identify stray records that may be outside of their disposition, and so there's no need to retain them any longer. But it also facilitates downstream activities, the ability to map data into a new information architecture or a new application for future management and access. So we've got a little bit of a audience participation coming up. And Tamara, do you want to walk us through it?
Absolutely. So I hope everybody can see the poll now on the screen, but we wanted to get a feel for what your top priority or your number one issue coming into this webinar today is when you think about your unstructured data. So would it be to clean up your raw data in bulk? That's your redundant, obsolete, trivial data. Would it be to continually monitor for compliance? It could be just mapping your data for a future or current migration. Or identifying your sensitive or personal identification information data, the PII data, or it could be all of the above. So if everybody could take a moment and just click through, and then we can sort of share what that looks like once everybody's answered. It looks like a lot of responses are coming in as all of the above. Great.
That's not surprising.
And the all of the above continues to climb. So we'll keep, should we keep moving then, Mark? We'll keep moving on?
Yeah, absolutely. What's interesting is that there's 25% are really interested in cleaning up of the rot. So that's one thing that we're going to focus on in the rest of this webinar.
Okay, perfect. Let's move on.
So before we do that, I just wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the nature of data in an organization. And it's really split into three main categories. We're looking at what we call structured data. That's data that's held in database management systems, financial systems. We've got then semi-structured data, which an example of that is email. And then finally, we have what we call unstructured data. And that's information that's sitting out there, for example, on file shares, maybe in SharePoint. It doesn't necessarily have any rigid structure to it, like a database management system. And it's really where the vast majority of that dark data is located. According to a recent Gartner survey, about 80% of all of the information under management in an organization is considered to be unstructured data. So really, that's the target that we're looking for when we're creating a data map and then facilitating other downstream information governance activities. What also came to light in that report was interesting. It was that around 33%, so a third of data in that unstructured sources hasn't been touched for 3 years. So it really is considered stale. And there's a question there that you need to ask yourself, for stale data, should we still be maintaining that? Can we remediate it? Can we lower the risk and lower the footprint of our unstructured data? And interestingly, moving forward, we're seeing organizations look to try and implement a holistic approach to information governance across their information sources. So that's trying to lay down the same policy, the same processes for structured, semi-structured, and unstructured data. And the best practices are very mature for structured data, but when it comes to unstructured data, there appears to be a gap there. And so the first step in filling that gap is really looking to building out a data map. Oops, went too far. So not only does unstructured data make up the vast majority of information, it's also very cluttered in nature. This chart gives a good indication of the kind of the pyramid of value and risk of unstructured data. And you can see if we look at the bottom, we've got a large proportion of that content is considered to be redundant, obsolete, or trivial, highly duplicative. We typically see organizations between 30 and 40% of their unstructured data be considered rot. We often see duplication of content anywhere between 10 and 25%, so fairly significant. And what an organization should be looking to do is to minimize that data footprint by starting out at the bottom, identifying and eliminating the redundant, obsolete, and trivial information, identifying additional content that maybe has no value. It's either met its retention period, or it's also considered to not be value anymore to the business. And then as we narrow down further, we'll have a set of content that we're not sure about. It really does require additional review, and there may be some additional remediation that we can do for that content. And finally, we arrive at the content that has high value. It's relevant to the business. It needs to be maintained on an ongoing basis. And that's really the target then for migration into a new repository. And so by going through this exercise that's driven by an initial data map, we're reducing the footprint, we're lowering the risk, and we're focusing on what's important to the business. I seem to be having issues with my mouse today. This is an interesting quote because we're now going to kind of dig a little bit deeper into the risk. And there's two types of companies: those that have been breached, and we've seen in the media recently numerous examples of large breaches, and companies that or organizations that don't know they've been breached and may indeed have been breached. So why is this important? Well, you're probably all aware that there's a new wave of data privacy regulations that are either in place now or emerging. In Europe, the GDPR regulations have been around now for 2 years, and we're already seeing organizations being faced with fines because of non-compliance. In Canada, we have PIPEDA, and there's some examples there of some additional regulations that are either in draft form or just emerged. In the United States, we now have the California Privacy Act, CCPA, which is relevant to residents of California. And we're starting to see regulations in the US coming out at the federal level. They're certainly being drafted, and we're expecting to see not only state level, but federal level. So we've got another quick question for you.
Right, and so privacy, it's critical, right? And I think, like you said, Mark, it's more and more in the news. You hear about companies being affected by breaches and what they're trying to do to cover themselves from a privacy perspective. So how prepared is your organization for the privacy regulations currently in place or pending? That could include GDPR, could include PIPEDA in Canada. For Canadian organizations, obviously PIPEDA would be frontline, but obviously there are many Canadian organizations that are globally based or have global operations, so they would also be affected by the other regulatory bodies across the globe. So if everyone could take a moment to answer this, are you very prepared, more than 90%, somewhat, more than 75%? Are you in progress, about 50% prepared, or are you not at all prepared, and that would be 25% or less prepared? Or do you not even know? So I'll give you a few minutes to finish up this poll, and then we'll show you the results. Looks like a lot of people are responding unknown. So you're not really quite sure where you stand with this. Or second leading answer right now is in progress, about 50% prepared.
Yeah, there seems to be a diverse spread there, which is really interesting.
I'll give it one more minute for everyone to respond. Okay, let's skip to the results. Up here. So about 29.3% of respondents are saying it's unknown. So, a little bit tenuous here. What do you think, Mark?
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll give you some tips that will help those to move forward. And for those that feel that they are prepared right now, it'd be some good validation.
Absolutely.
So it's very topical to present wiggle charts like this one in the times that we find ourselves in. This is a really interesting graph that really shows you the variance of the value of information over time, the cost to maintain that information over time, and the associated risk. And it's broken out here by color according to business vertical. So within an organization, so we've got HR, financial information, messaging such as email, etc. And one can see that the general trend is that over time, the business value of all information steadily decreases. In some cases, it's more rapid than others. But conversely, the risks associated with maintaining that information increases. So if that information contains PII, confidential information, other sensitive information, the risk of maintaining that over time and being exposed to discovery of that through breach or through fulfillment of a privacy request increases. So when it comes to risk, there's a lot of questions that you should be asking yourselves. And they're fairly fundamental questions, but it does require some soul searching. So what information do you have? Are you confident that you know what you're storing? Should you be storing it? Is it outside of its retention? Is it information that's no longer needed for business purposes? Is it information that you shouldn't be storing in the first place or retaining it? Who can get to that information? What access controls do you have over it? Do you understand who is able to access sensitive and private information? And not only who can get to it, should they be able to get to it? Are the right users accessing the right data in controlled manners across your organization? So this is a question I ask our prospects and clients all the time. And it's fundamentally, how can you protect what you don't know you have? So if you haven't gone through that data mapping exercise, if you haven't gone through a thorough inventory of what you have, how can you protect it if you don't know what's out there? Well, luckily, there's technology out there in the world that can help you understand what you have, create a data map for you in a timely and automated fashion, and then support downstream activities. So one class of tools that helps generate an inventory and data map is what we call file analysis tools. And they're tools that focus predominantly on unstructured data. And Active Navigation has a tool called Discovery Center, which is built from the ground up as a file analysis tool. And later on in the webinar, we'll give you a short demonstration of the tool and how it can be used to support data mapping and information governance use cases like you see here. So first and foremost, it's about discovery. Once you have an understanding of what you have, you can start to cleanse that data. You can start to clean up the rot. You can start to identify sensitive data that is out there and get a sense for the extent and nature of that across your organization. And that lays a foundation for you to be able to conform to the privacy regulations that are now in place and emerging. It provides the foundational layer to respond to requests. It provides the foundation layer so that you can lock down that information so that it's only available to the people that need to access it. And also, once you've gone through that inventory cleanup and identification of sensitive data, you can then use the file analysis tool to classify that content according to, say, for example, an information architecture, or record types or document types, and then use that knowledge to migrate the content from its current unstructured location, so for example, file shares, into a more tightly managed system like SharePoint or OpenText. Well, the story doesn't end there. It's not just a case of one and done. You're going to want to do ongoing governance across your organization. So file analysis tools can be used to support that in an automated fashion, whereby we're looking at accretions to the content on a periodic basis. And we're repeating the process that we developed at the beginning. So again, it's an activity of discovering those accretions, cleaning them up, identifying the sensitive data, and moving those deltas into the management system. And all that can be done in an automated fashion. So how do we get there, and how do we plan to be compliant against these regulations? Well, as we've talked about already, the first natural step is data mapping. And it's all about discovering your information, being able to classify it according to various taxonomies, and create a baseline inventory. And that provides insights into your data to start to make downstream decisions. It will give you insights into the extent of rot. It will give you the ability then to remediate that rot. It will give you the ability to inventory sensitive information across the organization. And get an understanding as to the nature and degree of the PII that you have out there in your enterprise. So once you know what you have, it's then a next step is to start cleaning that data up, to start lowering the risk, to start minimizing the amount of data that you're managing in your enterprise, and therefore lowering the cost of data management. Typically what we see is that an organization is able to clean up anywhere between 20 and 50% of their content through the remediation of rot, deduplication, and identification of data that's outside of its retention period and data that no longer has enduring business value. So quite a significant reduction in risk, and more importantly, reduction in cost. So now that we've narrowed down our data corpus, we can start enriching it and classifying it through file analysis. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to assert a structure on your data. So you can organize it according to business function, you could organize it according to retention period, etc. Any number of classifications that are important to the business. File analysis tools then can look inside content and extract pertinent information, and in particular, information that may identify individuals. So we're looking at things like personal identifiers, like SINs in Canada and SSNs in the US, looking for financial information, so it's credit card information, bank account information, etc. And any other information that is within your own organization is considered to be sensitive or can identify an individual. Once we've done that, we can classify content based on what we've extracted in terms of PII. So we can create classification schemes that are augmented with the privacy regulations. So for example, in CCPA in California and GDPR in Europe, there are different priorities of data around sensitiveness. So national identifiers are a higher priority than things like date of birth. So we're able to auto-classify content according to those priorities and how they relate to privacy regulations. Sorry. And then finally, we can support migration into a target structure. And the first step really is to understand how you want that content organized. What is your target information architecture? Once that's been defined, we can use the tools to classify against that and migrate the content into that new structure. But more importantly, what we can also do is any additional metadata that we've extracted from the content from an enrichment perspective, we can also migrate that into the target infrastructure. So not only do you have your content that was unorganized and cluttered, now streamlined, reorganized, you also have the ability to discover that through metadata enrichment. So there's a lot of side benefits from using a file analysis tool when it comes to data mapping, cleanup, and information governance. So what I'd like to do now is give you a quick demonstration of the Discovery Center platform and how it pertains to creating a data map and then how we can identify and clean up redundant, obsolete, and trivial information, how we can identify duplicates, and how we can identify sensitive data. So what you should be able to see on the screen now is the homepage for Discovery Center. Discovery Center, as I said, is a file analysis platform. It's deployed on-premise in your organization, and it's set up to analyze unstructured data. What you're seeing on the screen right now is our landing dashboard. This presents a series of high-level KPIs, showing you a breakdown of your content types by volume and age profiles of the content that are under management. So the first step of the process when we're creating a data map is to indicate where your content sources are. And Discovery Center has the ability to analyze multiple types of content sources. And we do that through what we call our network map here. And what you can see on the screen are a number of content sources that are connected to this instance. So we're able to look into email sources. So I have my Exchange connector here. We're able to look into file systems, and these could be local file systems. They could be network attached storage, any network drives you have out there, machines connected on a network, so local drives on laptops, for example. And you can see I've got 3 file systems connected here. But we can also connect to SharePoint and OpenText and other popular content management applications. And right here you can see I've got a SharePoint node connected. So when we add a node to this network map, Discovery Center doesn't know anything about it. So if I add a new node in here, I'll just add a simple file system node. And we'll select that as a file system. So when we add that node to the network map, you can see Discovery Center doesn't know anything about it. It's empty, there's 0 bytes. I can't extend that node down because we haven't discovered it yet. So the next step is to run a discovery index against that node. And that's a very quick operation. We run an index, we point it to this location, and it crawls down that location. And for every file that it finds in that location, it extracts the file system properties. So it's extracting the name of the file, its type, its size, when it was last modified, when it was created, etc. And it can use that information to build up a comprehensive inventory of the content under that node. And once we've run that index, you'll be able to explore that node in Discovery Center. So if we drill down here, you can see that I now have the ability to identify what's out there. And if I click on a particular node, on the right-hand side here, you see how many files I have. So at that drive level, you can see here we've discovered nearly 200,000 files. Now that initial discovery index is fairly rapid. We typically see rates of about 1 to 2 million files an hour. So within a very short period of time, you're able to create a very comprehensive inventory of the content. Now what the tool also does as part of that indexing, it runs a number of classification schemes. So it will classify content based on what it's extracted from the properties against schemes, for example, that define categories of redundant, obsolete, and trivial content. And I'll show you some of those now. So on the screen now, we're looking at the reporting module. And I'm going to run some basic reports against that node that I've previously indexed. So the first report I'm going to look at is an aging profile of that content. So let's see what that looks like. And what you're seeing here is a distribution of the files by the year that they were last modified. The vertical bars here give you a sense for how many files, and the red line indicates the volume of content. And what this is telling me is that I've got some fairly stale content in here. It's not been touched for more than 20 years. And what I can do is I can drill into that. So if I click at this and look at this in tabular form, you can see how many files I have in each of those years. And I can drill down into each of those years and get a list of files. What I can then do with the tool is I can actually start taking action. So I could, if I wanted to, delete these files because they're outside of their retention policy. I could quarantine them, put them in a different location for further review. Or I can tag them with a metadata field that says it's a candidate for remediation. So let's just quickly go back to the report view. So not only can I look at aging reports, but I can get a sense of the nature of this content by looking at the distribution of the file extensions. What this is showing me is the number of files according to the file extension. And to an IT person like myself, this means quite a lot. But to an information manager, it might not be clear what a .rtf file is. So what we can do is we can recast this data against a classification that's being run, which buckets various file extensions into content types. So if we go back to the report, we'll run a content type. So we'll run a file type by format, and we'll regenerate that. And now we're seeing these in content types, which are more familiar to an information manager. So we've got databases, we've got presentations, we've got images, and so on. So this is an example where we've classified files based on the file extension that we've extracted. It gives information in a much more digestible form. We talked about rot, so I'll show you another classification scheme that has been run as part of that indexing. And this is a classification based on categories of rot. And we've got the categories across the bottom here and the hits and the vertical bars. If we look at this in tabular form, it becomes a lot clearer. So we've got categories at the top here. We've got we found some music files which may be copyrighted files. They shouldn't be on the file system, so we could dive in and look at those in more detail. The second category here is we have empty files. There's no content in there. They offer no business value. And you can see we've got a substantial amount here across our enterprise. And nice thing you can do here is in one action, we can delete those files from across our information corpus. So a nice automated way of doing some quick cleanup here in a very efficient manner. So I want to show you the duplicate report. And this is based on files that are exact duplicates. They may have different file names. They may be in different locations. They may even have different extensions. But what the tool does is it analyzes files based on the specific contents of a file and does a bit-by-bit comparison. So these are exact duplicates. What you're seeing here is the green files are the unique files. There's no duplicates. And then the combination of blue and orange is the master copy and any associated duplicates. And you can see here I've got quite a large number of duplicates, 110,000. And again, just like with any other chart, if I was a fairly liberal organization, I could delete these in place and do full deduplication in one click. But most organizations are a little bit more conservative than that. So what we can do is we can generate a list of those files and have them reviewed outside of the tool. And so finally, one last report I want to show as part of this demo is what we call a sensitive data report. So I'm going to show it specific to a generic case. So in creating this report, what we've done is we've looked through the contents of every file, and we've run a series of extraction rules where we're looking for patterns like credit card numbers, SIN values, bank account numbers, etc. And we then use the results of that data extraction to classify files against different types of PII. And again, if we look at this in data table form, you can see that we've got high priority classifications here where we found credit card numbers where there's 6 or more of them in a file. The second one is always very interesting to me. We're all guilty of creating password files like spreadsheets or text files because we have so many passwords these days we can't remember them all. And you'd be amazed at how many of these we find on client infrastructures. And this is what hackers are looking for when there's a breach, because this gives them the keys to a broader kingdom. And you can see there's different other priorities here of PII according to the nature of what's been found. All of these classification schemes that you're seeing here are fully customizable, so it's not fixed. If you wanted to identify files with just 3 credit card numbers in there, you can modify the rules around the classification and reclassify the data. So I'm going to stop there in the interest of time. I could spend many hours showing you the features of the tool, but I hope it's giving you a flavor for how you can use technology to create a data map and then start taking actions like identifying redundant, obsolete, and trivial content, identifying duplicates, identifying the nature and extent of sensitive data across your enterprise, and using the tool to take actions on those results to either delete them or quarantine them to a more secure environment, which you would certainly want to do with the hits here, or migrate them into another infrastructure.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mark. I'm not sure if you want to answer a few technical questions before we move forward, but we can always get to those at the end if you prefer. We just had a few questions about connections and mapping.
Yeah, sure. So we have a question from Ray about connecting to custom database with blob storage. Right now, Discovery Center is set up and built from the ground up to deal with unstructured data. So that's file systems and files stored in management systems like SharePoint, as I showed. At the moment, we don't tackle blob storage. What we do is we find clients integrating us with tools that are more focused on those systems. And so they integrate us with other products to create that holistic view across both structured and unstructured data. A question from George, does the tool map who has access to data? We can do that. We have some ancillary scripts that capture what's called the access control logs for each file. And what we can do is then we can ingest that information into Discovery Center and associate it with the files that we've analyzed. And then you can run reports on those access controls. And then Ray has another question. Can you surface custom fields available in your inventory nodes and map to target for migration? Absolutely, yeah, and that's what most of our clients do. They use those custom fields to drive that target migration structure.
That's great. And one more from Charles. How extensive is the text content extraction and indexing? And is the indexing only based on the report parameters?
So the text content extraction is highly extensible. There's no limit to the number of extraction rules that you can define in the system. It's based off two principles. The first is a simple keyword list, where you define a list of terms and synonyms to look for in the content. And the second is based off what we call regular expression syntax, where you're defining a pattern to look for. Now, the tool comes out of the box with about 100 patterns. So, for example, the SIN and credit card numbers for all the different types. But what we often find is that clients and customers build out their own extraction rules. So they may have, for example, naming conventions for customer IDs or account numbers, etc. And so they build those out, add them to the index, and once if the index finds a match on any of those patterns, it will store the value or values in the metadata field for each file.
Perfect, great. So let's keep going. We're getting into our last few 20 minutes here. So we'll move on and talk about more of the complete solution. And thank you again, Mark, for showing the application. And if there are any more questions, keep them coming. We can get back to that in the Q&A. So what really brings a data governance initiative or solution together is taking proven technologies such as the Active Navigation suite of software and adding the right people and process. There has to be good people with the right technology and the right processes to make a file analysis or content cleanup project successful. It's the intersection of these three components that really brings a project to life and brings it forward for our clients. So the RICO and Active Navigation teams work seamlessly to ensure that businesses are able to advance on the core use cases that are of primary concern to the health of the organization. And when we talk about user stories or use cases that are key for our clients, you can see that it really depends on the business unit. It really depends on the role and the responsibilities of each of those business units. But there is an intersection of all of these teams and these stakeholders towards managing information and addressing the various components that go along with that, whether it be risk or cost mitigation. For us at RICO eDiscovery, we have had more and more demand and more interest from our clients in strategies towards reducing eDiscovery costs. And a lot of the cleanup that Mark talked about today on raw data does impact an organization's ability to mitigate those costs. When you're reducing overall volumes, you're going to reduce the amount of eDiscovery that needs to take place when a legal event occurs. And if you're thinking about, when I think about other top use cases that come along, definitely data cleanup for migrations, definitely consolidating storage and data centers to mitigate cost impact. And then, of course, from a FOIP or risk perspective, there is a huge user case here for different divisions in the FOIP area or the records management division of a company. So obviously, there's too many use cases to go into today, but we wanted to highlight some of them for you as a summation. So when we talk about keys to success, It's very important to remove barriers and just take the initial steps towards making improvements you want. So some of the tips that we have for our clients include keeping it simple to get buy-in early on the process, selecting a pilot business area, and just start with a manageable amount of data to prove out the process. Understand the size and scale of the problem at hand. What is your data estate? How old is your data estate, and what sort of data is actually intermingling in that information footprint? How do we build out a repeatable process? And our teams, consult towards that. We can work very closely with our clients to make that happen. And then finally, build out that strong business case from the resulting metrics that come from running a pilot. When you're building a business case to get buy-in, remember that attempting to prepare content for migrations manually is just not practical. It's incredibly time-consuming and costly. It's typically prone to errors and inefficiencies. Having a well-developed policy is critical, and in past projects we've seen that getting sign-offs for recommended processes and policy ensured rapid timeframes for determining in-scope and out-of-scope data. So reusing agreed processes across the business will ensure smooth migrations in a timely manner. So the goal overall is to ensure that only relevant content is migrated to the new environment. So significant reductions in data volumes reduce the burden on the business, and in our experience, a closer liaison between business analysts and business users is needed to ensure the success. We are offering a content assessment promo for our RICO clients, we have run many of these for RICO clients to date and are happy to extend this offer this spring. The POC is on up to 2 terabytes of data and is on offer for a limited time, but it's an excellent opportunity for our clients to trial the active navigation application on a user-defined data set in a very simple, straightforward way. The application can index up to 2 terabytes of data in a matter of hours, and you will be able to access the assessment results via reports that we provide within days. So, Mark, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to this, but we have gone through many of these POCs with many clients across Canada. Did you want to speak to that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great way to get some insights into what you have. Not only that, but it's a very quick engagement. Typically, we can complete these in 1 or 2 weeks of elapsed time. I just actually did one in 2 days, so it was pretty good. But what it does is it gives you the right set of information to put together a business case to take to your stakeholders to get buy-in. If you're able to show on a representative set of data that there are significant gains to be made in terms of rot reduction, lowering that footprint, lowering the risk, and lowering the cost, it's a great way to present that case and move forward on a more solid information governance approach yourself.
Absolutely. So in terms of the benefits of taking advantage of a content assessment like this, you're going to get a holistic view of your data sets that you provide. So it's much better to view the application using your own data, because you're gaining insight in a very, very rapid time that you can utilize to develop initiatives for the future. You're able to resolve data spillage and PII, so you're identifying and remediating sensitive content. You're able to look to storage reductions of 30% plus. I know Mark said anywhere from 20 to 50. It's remarkable to me when we think about our clients, the people that we've worked with, and the amount of e-trash or duplicate information that is currently being managed, stored, protected, and it has no business value. So there's a lot to be gained from that. And finally, you're going to empower your teams to drive organizational change around data cleanup. So we're going to move into the Q&A. I know we have about 10 minutes left. So I know there are a couple more questions coming in, Mark. So let's run through them now. So from Ray, it's do the extraction rules use full text searching as well as metadata field search?
Yeah, so I'll probably need to give a bit more detail into how the indexing works. So Discovery Center doesn't do what a lot of other products do, and it doesn't create a full text index. Because in doing so, that would create a large footprint for the index. And some of our clients are in the petabyte range, and so managing that large index becomes very costly. So what we do is we look for specific pieces of information that are driven by the extraction rules that are in place. So for example, we may be looking just for credit card information, so patterns that represent a credit card number, 16-digit number, and bank account numbers. And that's all the tool would look for if that's how the index was defined. And if we do find a hit or hits, it stores those values in the associated metadata field. So through indexing, what we're building up is a customized metadata catalog that represents the information that is of most value or high relevance to the organization in order to inform decision-making around cleanup and identification of sensitive data.
Okay, great. And more from Ray. Can you import existing RM file plans and schedules into the D-Center to apply to inventories?
That's a great question. The answer is yes. So we have a modeling tool which clients use to define their classification schemes. And what we can do is we can bring in existing schemes. So if an organization had a records management file plan or information architecture, they can bring that into the modeling tool and then develop rules around each node in that classification scheme. So for example, if you were looking at a file plan and say HR records that were performance reviews, we could write a rule around what we'd extracted. So if we find the presence of an employee's name, if we find keywords that represent terms that are typically found on a performance review, we can craft up those rules. We can actually test the rules out before we release them into the production environment. And so what clients can do is they can ensure that the rules that they've developed are giving high recall, a high precision of recall, and lowering the number of false positives.
Excellent. That's great. Thank you, Mark. Are there any other questions? I know Sheila had asked us to redisplay the complimentary content assessment screen, which we just did. We'll wait for a few more minutes for any more questions. I do have a question for you, Mark. You know, active navigation has been in business for 10 years, making you ahead of the curve when it comes to file analysis. Why do you think that now, 2019, 2020, there's been such a marked shift for organizations prioritizing information or content governance more than ever before?
Yeah, so we're right. We were ahead of the curve, and our early adopters were typically records managers. But I think what we've seen recently, certainly with the emergence of regulations such as GDPR and CCPA and PIPEDA, is that we're now getting interest from CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers, and an emergence of data privacy officers. That is a new role that's emerging in organizations. We're starting to see a lot of interest from them because it's their responsibility to make sure that they comply with those regulations, make sure that that information is protected. And so we're seeing a lot of interest now that's coming from that area, driven by regulation. And it's kind of very complementary to the traditional information management discipline that we've engaged with traditionally in the past.
Right. And Mark, when you talk about the AN solution addressing the volume around unstructured data, how many file types can the solution assess and identify?
Yeah, so that's a question we always get asked. So right now, the tool can perform deep textual analysis on about 650 different file formats. So that covers the popular types like Microsoft Office, so Word, Excel, email formats. all the way down through to some fairly legacy and aged formats. So we can look inside early word processing formats like WordStar and Lotus 123. What we're looking at doing moving forwards is to start to look at formats that are non-textual in nature. So, for example, audio and video, looking to make use of emerging technologies that can do auto transcription of audio and then be able to index that audio.
Right, great. And what about non-searchable PDFs or paper documents?
Great question, because often we find that an organization has gone through a large-scale digitization project, and often the output of that is PDF content, but it's not got the text layer in there. It's a scanned image. So Discovery Center right now can identify files that fall into that nature. And what we typically do is work with organizations like RICO to, once we've identified those files, have them processed, have an OCR process run on them. And once that's been performed, it inserts a text layer into the file. And then Discovery Center can then pick those back up and can analyze that text layer.
Right, excellent. And what about, can you import record retention rules? I know we get that question a lot. I thought we should bring that one up.
Yeah, what we can do is, in addition to bringing in a file plan or an information architecture, what we can do is we can augment the rules around each node that includes conditions around retention periods. So, for example, if a file retention period is maintained for 20 years from the point of creation, we can actually identify that time frame based on the creation date and the date that we're running the analysis. And therefore, we can classify against that rule, that retention rule, and determine whether or not it's in or out of scope.
Right, right. And what about, how do you handle local drives?
Yeah, so in the demo, the content sources that you saw there were actually local drives on my machine. So we can analyze any file system that exposes a standard protocol, and that includes local drives on the machine that you're running the software, network drives, storage area networks, or network attached storage, and also machines that are active on a network. We can, given the right permission access, we can also analyze local drives on those machines. We actually have a network discovery utility that we can run that will identify all the content sources that are currently sitting on an organization's network.
Excellent. Well, I think we're about to run out of time, Mark, so I don't know if you have anything you want to say in summary before we go.
Yeah, I would encourage people to take advantage of the offer that we showed on the slides. It's a great way to get started. It's a great way to learn about your own content. It's a great way to see some surprises and start to gather the right information to build that business case to take up to senior management.
Excellent. And, you know, circling back to data mapping, right? Such a foundational exercise to take to sort of initiate those governance initiatives that you know that you want to explore, but you're just not really sure where to start. So let's build that bedrock and start with data mapping, and then we can take it from there. So thank you to everyone for joining us today. We're right out of time, but we really appreciate your time and for joining us. And this webinar will be recorded, has been recorded, and will be provided to those who weren't able to make it to the live session today. Thanks, Mark. I really appreciate your expertise and everything that you shared, and we'll talk to you soon. Have a great
Oh,
day.
thank you. The pleasure was all mine. And thanks to everyone out there who took time out of the day to participate today. It's highly appreciated.
Absolutely. Have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you.